My name is Rhonda Williford. I am a longtime resident of Washington, D.C. For 34 years, I worked at the National Labor Relations Board as a labor lawyer. I was on the same staff during all that time, during the course of several different board members. It often was the chairman. I retired in July of 2013. At that point, I was senior counsel on the staff of Chairman Mark Gaston Pierce.
Okay, why don't you talk about growing up and your background?
I'm a post-World War II baby, boomer baby. My parents both came from difficult, even impoverished backgrounds. My father was from Mississippi. His father was a carpenter and contractor. And after the father left the family of 6, my father being the 5th, when my father was about 11, the family largely supported itself by being sharecroppers. My mother grew up in West Virginia, also the 5th of 6 children. She describes herself as being born in ignorance and poverty. Her parents were tenant farmers. Each of my parents, the 5th of 6 children, were the first in their family to graduate from high school. They both moved to Maryland after the war, World War II. They lived next door. They had relatives in common. They married, and my mother, who grew up in a they both grew up in very strong religious situations. My father, Methodist, my mother, various denominations, but she was most influenced by the Mennonites. And both of her parents converted to being Mennonites, was quite unusual to convert to Mennonitism, and they converted late in their life. But my mother was very much influenced by the Mennonite religion, and the way that she interpreted that religion, which she felt extremely strong about, a great sense of equality of all humankind, that we are all brothers and sisters under God, and that social justice was an extremely important value to her, and that I was raised from a very early age, as was my 3 brothers, with that value of extreme importance. So much so that, and I was also a child of, in high school during the 60s, a child of the 60s, so I was very much influenced by the social justice of that as well. So I wanted to work in a field of social justice. So my older brother and I did very well in school. We both got scholarships to college. I had a full scholarship. I decided in college that I wanted to go to law school and pursue some career in social justice. In law school, William and Mary Law School, that became focused in on labor rights. I had worked briefly in a labor law firm as a secretary between college and law school. And so I became focused in on labor rights. This was also influenced by my mother, having grown up in West Virginia. One of her brothers was a coal miner, and of course a member of the United Mine Workers. So she grew up in a very pro-union environment. So after law school, I had an interview with the National Labor Relations Board. I was hired. I went back to my parents and I said, this is a job, if I could have any job in the world, this is the job that I would most want to have. And I realized my focus was social justice. I realized that this was a bureaucratic type job, but that was fine with me. I was willing to be, sort of a humble worker in the fields kind of person. And so I stayed there. I worked hard. I tried to do the best I could. The early years were quite positive. There were, a lot of people there who shared my values. It was generally a positive workplace. But at a certain point, which I would identify as into the younger Bush's administration, the workplace started to become toxic. The major change that took place was that a consultant that was hired by the Bush administration, it was reported in the Washington Post, and these consultants came up with a report saying that most employees only do the basics of what the job requires, and therefore most employees should be given a medium rating, basically a mediocre rating. And the clear impression was given to us that that was not going to be problematic. Even if you work there for decades, that you should be happy with a mediocre rating. Now, part of this was, at the same time, the Bush administration, largely through Karl Rove, was making statements about how they wanted to totally revamp the civil service system. And as you know, the civil service system, which from what I remember from history, was instituted because of numerous abuses of not having a regulated system. And even, I think it was President Garfield was assassinated relating to a job seeker who did not think he was being treated fairly. So it gradually evolved that the civil service system was put into place to provide guarantees of regularity and fairness. And the whole, over time, and I'm not sure exactly the chronology of that, there was the whole system of grades and steps and having to be validated at each step as you progressed, and the managers having to work within that system. Now, going back to Karl Rove and his statement, he basically wanted to revamp the civil service system, to do away with all these grades and this very structured system that had some guarantees of fairness, and give the man, and instead of that, in each agency, there would be broad bands into which employees would be designated. And the managers would have broad discretion of where to put employees within these bands without regard to how long they have been there, whether they had proven themselves or not. And was basically a total strip. What they wanted was a total stripping away of a regularized, protected system, in a major way, shift the huge power to the managers to reward and penalize employees as they chose without regard to a regularized system. I think they first tried it at the Department of Defense. I'm not quite sure that it went through. The ultimate effect was that the Bush administration was not successful at getting it through. I'm not quite sure why that was. I think probably inertia had a lot to do with it, that the civil service system had been intact for so many years. But by the Office of Personnel Management sending out these orders that, based on this consultant study, which said that most employees only did the basics of what the job required, which from my working class background is a clear class discrimination statement. People who work for a living do not work hard. They do not have an interest in doing their job well. They basically just do the minimum to get by. And I read this report. There was absolutely zero research, zero statistical evidence backing up It was basically an ideological report. It was as offensive to me, and this would have been totally offensive to me, if they had made a report that said that African Americans only did the basic of what the job required, or women only did or pick whatever category you want. But because it was about class, which we deny in this society, there was no outrage about it. When management presented it to us at the labor board, we were told it was about raising the standards. But it wasn't about raising the standards. It was about giving the managers more control over how to rate the employees. The standards were very perfectionistic. So if you looked at them, a manager could pretty much put any employee in any of the categories they wanted to. And it seemed a major goal. And they insisted that a certain number of people had to be in the middle, 3 out of 5 rating, one above having your job in jeopardy. And it seemed very clear from the beginning that the purpose of doing that is that management would, once they put you in that category, it would not be that difficult to move you down one, and then you'd be out the door. And at the NLRB, the first year they did this, there was overwhelming evidence that it was applied in a discriminatory fashion. If you were over 40, if you were especially over 50, if you're a woman over 40 or 50, there were very few minorities, but if you were a minority, the one category that was most discriminated against, and this is very consistent with studies on bullying, were those very few employees who had visible disabilities, and they went after them like bloody murder. First of all, the union was meeting with management. This was a professional association, the Union of the Lawyers, on the board side of the agency, which is only those lawyers who work for the board members, plus the election unit, the representation unit. And ironically, at headquarters, we have a split. There is the board employees who work for the board members, and there's the general counsel who work for the general counsel. The general and counsel employees were not brought into this at all. For some reason, the general counsel thought he could operate fine without doing this to his employees. But the board side of the agency decided that they needed to do this. And I need to mention one extremely critical factor. One incentive, and in my opinion, the greatest incentive for the board going along with this, the Office of Personnel Management made it a condition for the managers' salaries to be increased, not just for 1 year, not just for 2 years, but for the rest of the manager's career and pro rata for the rest of their retirement. In other words, from my working class background, this is how I see it. The managers were asked by the OPM sending out these orders to change the evaluation. I don't know, and this is also my working class perspective. Where I come from, if you screw somebody for money, there's a certain word that applies. And it's not a respectable word, and it's not a word that any ethical manager would want to apply to himself. I mean, the managers had rated these employees for years at certain levels, and all of a sudden they said, oh, we've been overrating them. And they did no research, they presented no evidence that the employees had been overrated. And instead, they downrated over half the employees, largely on a discriminatory basis, largely with the purpose of putting many employees in this low rating so they could be lopped off, which they proceeded to do. over the next few years. And they claimed it was all about raising the quality of work, but there was no commensurate interest in training the employees. You know, in my practical mind, if there's a problem that the employees are not performing at a high enough level, you train them, you bring in training. First of all of these employees were lawyers, well-educated, hired by these very people who were now saying they weren't good enough. And for instance, at one point I suggested, because one thing that they really gave employees a hard time about was our ratings on legal writing, because that's so subjective. And so I suggested, I suggested that, I said to the union and to management both, I said, we have a lot of good writers here. Why don't we devise a legal writing program and bring everybody in and explain to them what management considers good writing and educate them and bring them up to whatever level. Totally dismissed out of hand. And what they told me was, well, we have a group of about 10 retirees that if an employee feels they need remedial work, they can go back and do some remedial work with those retirees. And somehow that came up in a conversation with my supervisor. And at that point, I had been there 30 years. And she suggested that I go back and work with the supervisor I had worked with 20 years prior, who, at the time that she supervised me, rated me outstanding in legal writing. And this supervisor just looked at me with a blank face, as if that wasn't insane. I mean, it was so ridiculous, I didn't even respond. I said, I just thought to myself, are you out of your blankety blank mind? I'm supposed to go back and work with someone I worked with 20 years ago who at that time thought I was an excellent writer? And besides, you're my supervisor now. It's your job.
That's right. It's
your job to give me feedback on writing if you don't like my writing. But so all of that happened during the second administration of the second Bush. It was pretty late on. And the union did not file an overall grievance. I did encourage the union to file a letter of protest, which I wrote the original draft for, and they did, but nothing ever came of that. The union did have this very active union grievance person, Glenn Stevens, who took up individual grievances as people were downgraded. And he was quite effective, and he was able to get some of the people's ratings restored, but not all of them. But very soon into that, management clearly targeted him. He was downrated, and I don't know all the exact details of how he was treated, but my impression, it clearly fell into the realm of bullying. For instance, he would prepare a draft memo. In one case, he prepared a draft memo. All the upper management approved it. It was circulated to the other staffs as this is standard procedure. And after that was all done, they belatedly decided that there was something he had done incorrectly in that, which I don't know, I don't remember exact details, but it wasn't very convincing. It was, you've already put your stamp of approval on it, and now it was just clearly a sort of a got you kind of thing. It just became clear that they were not going to tolerate him remaining there, and he did leave. And I don't know if he filed an individual grievance, but I do know that the union did not file a grievance about their grievance chairperson being forced out or being discriminated against. I talked to, I believe it was the union steward on my staff, strongly encouraging her, why doesn't the union do something? Goes to the very heart of the union activity. If we don't, they're going after an effective grievance person. And her response was, that's up to Glenn to decide. It's not a matter for the union to decide. To me, it was a totally separate issue, regardless of whether he filed a grievance himself. Actually, the greater, however noxious it was to him, and it was, and unlawful. Here you are at the NLRB, he's being discriminated for engaging in protected concerted activity. The even greater offense was for management to go after the heart, a critical function of the union in that way, basically disempowering the union. Soon after that, from what I heard, I guess anecdotally, it was considered that the board, meaning the board side of the lawyers that work for the board members and the election unit, was at the lowest morale in the history of the agency. Now, the agency started about 1935. This was in the second Bush administration, probably about well into the history of the agency, decades. I would say the mere fact if it was only the sole fact of going after the union grievance person, that was union busting. But it went beyond that. It was decided that the morale was so low they would bring in the Federal Mediation Conciliation Service, which was brought in. And I have yet to understand the rationale or the legitimacy of this. Apparently, the Federal Mediation Conciliation Service recommended that there be formed a labor management committee, which from that point on was the main vehicle through which the union operated. Now, this was an exception. There was one on the general counsel side, and there was one on the board side. So management would appoint, I think, like 4 or 5 management people. The union would appoint 4 or 5 management people. And if any labor-related issue came up, they would meet and collectively decide how to proceed. Now that is union busting, if anything is. And some of the people that management appointed, one person in particular, deputy chief for the chairman, Kathleen Nixon, long history of bullying employees, long history of forcing employees out after many years. In my personal opinion, and I have studied psychology, I have a degree in psychology. I was on the board of directors of the Jungian Society of Washington for 5 years. I've taken many courses in psychology. If she's not a sociopath, I've never met a sociopath. And she was on the Labor Management Committee and has been the whole time.
So what happened under the Clinton administration?
It just continued. To this day, the labor management continues. I mean, there's still the professional association. There's still a president. There's still an executive committee. They meet and they pursue certain issues. But at the same time, there's the labor management committee. And I don't know how they decide who gets to decide what, but the question I have is, why should there be a labor management committee at all? Why are they preempting even any portion of what the professional association should be doing? Labor management in American history works as a adversarial system. It doesn't work as we're in each other's pockets system. And that's how the Labor Management Committee works.
Now, this bullying of the workforce, people tried to fight it. And they themselves were bullied. What happened to you in your situation?
I don't know that people fought it. It was a very complicit staff. For instance, this happened under the chairmanship of Robert Batista, a Republican. The current chairman, Mark Gaston Pierce, is a Democrat. So I don't think party affiliation has anything to do with it. During these changes, one of the managers, basically the henchman for the board members, was asked to meet individually with each of the staff to explain how the new evaluation system would work, to explain how employees would be downrated because they had been overrated. No explanation, no evidence presented. I was on Chairman Batista's staff at that meeting. He was sitting 2 offices over. I'll put this euphemistically, he did not even have the backbone to show up. And you can imagine what the non-euphemistic words would be. He left this to Gary Shinners, a manager.
Was he a lawyer too?
Yes, everybody's a lawyer. And he explained, at this meeting, he explained how it would work. He did not explain why it was necessary. Now, the staff at the time maybe had 20 people. I spoke up. I was the only one to speak up against it. I said there was no evidence supporting this, and that it was basically that it was abuse of the employees. And no one backed me up. There were the union steward was there, did not back me up. Kathleen Nixon, at one point, turned to me and said, "Now, Rhonda, this is hard for all of us." And to which I said, "Oh, I recognize this. This is like when parents, not my parents, but parents used to say, 'This hurts me more than it hurts you.'" And she was very sort of bristly. But there was no real conversation about the merits. It was basically, this is the way it's going to be.
And the lawyers were afraid. The staff lawyers were afraid to speak up.
Yes, they were afraid to speak up. They were even afraid to, after I spoke up, because I always think it's a little easier once somebody's broken the ice.
Sure.
But no one, not a soul backed me up. Not a soul. I think at that point I might have been steward. I resigned the next couple days. I figured, I'm too radical. I'm too radical for this group. I have no effectiveness. So I resigned and somebody else became the steward. So there was the mass downrating in a discriminatory fashion. There were the grievances pursued. The system is still in place. Over time, the system has sort of become watered down. For instance, the newer employees are generally rated much higher than the more senior employees.
There's age discrimination, you're saying?
Oh, they didn't miss, you name a discrimination, they didn't miss a one. Age, I think the predominant one was age. Sex, race, ethnic background. For instance, one of my friends was Vietnamese American. She was pigeonholed as mediocre. 10 years later, she couldn't get out of that. At the same time, her supervisor was rated outstanding. Now, and my brother, who's also a lawyer, I would tell him about this, and he says, how can a supervisor be outstanding and not bring up his employee in 10 years to be above mediocre? And the supervisor wasn't the least bit bothered by it. He got his. It became a system of you get yours and screw the person in the next office.
It was incentivizing retaliation against employees. Is that what
Well,
it
there
is?
was
They
so little protest. I mean, I basically was the only one that protested, other than while he was there, the union grievance person. People just sort of tucked their heads down and tried to do the best they could. You know, I would talk to my friend. I said, you know, aren't you discouraged? And this is a woman who came from Vietnam when she was 8 years old. She was on the last boats out when the collapse of Saigon. She came to the United States. She's brilliant enough to do well in American schools and become a lawyer. And then she goes to the NLRB, and she's not good enough to be anything other than a mediocre lawyer. Now, what credibility does that have? But of course, her designation was not because of her work. It was because she was a Vietnamese American. Racism, ethnic background, age, sex, disability. I didn't see sexual orientation in this particular scenario, although I think in other scenarios there has been. Because in the federal sector, you can't, if I understand correctly, discriminate. But they basically didn't skip a protected category. Not a single man, not one single man under 40 was downgraded.
So why wasn't there a lawsuit, a civil rights lawsuit against the agency?
That's a good question. I remember talking to the union officers about that, and they said, well, in downgrading employees, they don't necessarily lose money, and there has to be a loss of money in order for there to be a lawsuit. So, and I remember bringing this up with the union officers, although feasibly there was a loss of money, because if you're given a mediocre rating, your chances of getting a bonus are nil.
That's right. We're discriminated against.
But they just, the union just wasn't willing to follow up on it. And they didn't even really particularly press the point of the discrimination. I'd say caving in describes it pretty well. And people divide and conquer, people looking out for their own interest. I remember talking to the union president, the then union president at one point about this and how miserable so many employees were. And she said, well, some people here are perfectly happy. You know, the favorite ones, the ones that were given the high ratings. And to me, the way I was raised, it's not just a matter of whether you're being treated fairly. You should also have an interest in whether you're the person in the next office down the hall is being treated fairly. It's like in an abusive families. It's still an abusive situation, even if only 1 out of 5 children is being beaten up. I was shocked. I was brokenhearted. I was outraged.
Why was it happening at this federal agency?
Because the Office of Personnel Management said, you downrate your employees and the manager's salary will go up. Cash for screwing. And I can say what that is. The managers were whores.
And so what happened to you? They started to bully you and harass you?
Yes, because I spoke up, and I pretty much can say I was the only person speaking up. And my friends would sometimes advise me to keep quiet, but I didn't seem to have that gene. So, and it was still going on. And it wasn't just a matter of, what outraged me so much was, it wasn't just a matter of bad management, which it was, because do you really get the best work out of your employees? Was it really to the advantage of the mission of the agency to treat their employees badly? A lot of their employees badly. But the ethics of it, to take cash in return for downrating your employees and to and to lock employees in certain ratings and not let them out, no matter what they did or how they did. And at the same time, to tell them, to sit down and tell them, because this happened to me, because I was downrated, although briefly I was uprated again, then I was downrated again. I think maybe they thought by uprating me I would shut up, which I didn't. But they would sit with me, and from the very beginning, they would tell employees, this is really an elite organization. So even if you're getting a medium rating, that's really something to be proud of, because we are just such a superior organization. And as I say, I've studied psychology, and this is narcissism all over the place. And the arrogance of people who are getting top ratings and bonuses, telling people who basically have, we all were lawyers, we've all had basically the same education, and I didn't see any great divergence of intelligence among the group, telling people, this very homogeneous group, that some of us should accept a lower status. Now, to me, this is part of the whole picture of what's going on in our society, the 99 and the 1, that so many of us are being encouraged to take, it's the classism, to believe that we are inherently inferior and we should take whatever crumbs we can get. My theory is that if it's at the NLRB headquarters, ground zero for the protection of employee rights, what other agencies is it happening at? And I just anecdotally, I know that it is happening, it has happened at other agencies. EPA, Department of Labor, which is another irony. But I think if some serious research was done, I think it would be showed that it's more the exception than the rule. And another oddity about it is there was some discretion here, because I said the general counsel side didn't go along with this, but the board side did. So if it was so essential, and no one ever explained how it was essential, to the well-being of the agency, to the promotion of the agency's goals, why did the general counsel find it unnecessary? As far as I can figure out, the general counsel wasn't willing to screw over his own employees, and the board side people were. I remember having a conversation with the then union president and Kathleen Nixon, protesting how I was being stuck in this category. And one of them said to me, well, Rhonda, what exactly do you want here? And I said, I basically just want to be treated like a human being. And they both rolled their eyes and said, that's not to the effect, that's not even relevant here. That's not even relevant here. Common decency. And that was the president and the union president and the manager. And I talked to one of my friends, and she said, who was stuck in the lower rating, and she said, well, she was trying to cope with it as best as she could, which I give her great credit for. This is my Vietnamese American friend. And she says, well, it's really only about my ego. It hurts my ego, but I still have my job, I still have my salary. But should a person have to sacrifice their ego for their job? Should they have to feel diminished and demeaned just to earn a living? And I remember, if I had a vague memory, which I think is accurate, of the Brown versus Board of Education case, lawyer who
for the NAACP.
Yeah,
That's,
and he made, and the Board of Education case, Brown versus Board of Education case, the Board of Education made the point that the black schools were equal to the, were equal to the white schools as far as or at least they claimed they were, as far as facilities, quality of teachers, and all of that. And the lawyer for the NAACP said, but the psychological factors count too. Thurgood Marshall. The status counts too, the psychological factors count too. So to me, that was a similar situation. Even though, trying to sympathize with my friend who was dealing with it as best as I can, there was no valid reason that she should have had to sacrifice her ego or her status just because of this rigid system that required so many people in a lower category, basically so that the managers could continue to get a higher salary.
And this is a class struggle in the NLRB? Is that what you're saying? This is a class?
I'm saying it's it covered all the discriminatory factors, but I think at the heart it's a class struggle. And it's so ironic because it was such an homogenous group. You have a group of basically equally educated lawyers, fairly, in general sense, fairly equally endowed in intelligence, but the top managers having an insistence that there be this strict hierarchy. They're insistent that there be a lower class. And to me, that's the same dynamics as racism. I think there's something questionable in human history and the human psyche that so many people are not able to feel good about themselves, which is a perfectly legitimate goal, standing on their own feet, but they need to stand on the neck of somebody else. It's them, as I used to say, because it's the massa that needs the slave. It's not the slave that needs the massa. And unfortunately, we still have that dynamic that so many people are not psychologically or ethically evolved enough to stand on their own feet and to allow other people to succeed, but require that there be an underclass whose neck they can stand on to feel better, to feel good about themselves. And of course, that's just psychologically. It doesn't even go into monetary and other things.
Doesn't that lead to corruption and kind of craziness? I mean,
it leads to total craziness. It leads to total craziness. For instance, here I was, and in a similar situation, to my Vietnamese friend who had overcome great obstacles to become a lawyer from a clearly underprivileged background. I had become a lawyer. I had gone to college on a full scholarship. I'd gone to a very good law school. I don't mean to brag, but I qualified twice over, becoming a member of Mensa. I have an IQ in the top percentile. I have an extensive intellectual life, much more so than my colleagues, my manager colleagues, and I was being treated as an intellectual inferior.
So this is savagery in a way. I mean, they're trying to. I mean, you should respect and you would want to use that talent and that creativity.
They seem more interested in keeping me down and nitpicking me to death. And over the course of time, I developed depression, anxiety disorder, and PTSD. And my psychiatrist, who was treating me, and who's still treating me, put in a report to management, spelling out to them that I was being treated for these problems and that they were being caused by how I was being treated at the workplace. Not a single member of management expressed any concern whatsoever about that. They in no way lessened the bullying, the targeting of me. And from a human perspective, I can't comprehend that. If I had gotten a letter saying that my behavior was causing someone PTSD, what soldiers get from being shot at. How, as a moral person, could I not take that seriously? They didn't dispute it. They didn't refute it. They didn't ask me to go to their own psychiatrist for a second opinion. They considered it irrelevant. Or I think perhaps in their own mind it sort of just invalidated my perspective. Oh, she's just a screwed up person. So we don't need to pay attention to her arguments.
She's mentally ill.
Yeah, she's mentally ill. She's mentally ill.
And we have nothing to do with that.
And yeah, even though there was a highly regarded psychiatrist on the staff of George Washington Hospital, who'd been in practice for over 30 years, who had validated this, and that was just totally ignored. Even to the only time that they gave it any attention, because part of their bullying, at a certain point, they started writing up all these memos about me. If I would do anything that they considered the slightest incorrect, they would issue me this memo. So they issued one of these memos, and they referred to the fact, in clear violation of EEO regulations, that I was seeing a psychiatrist for mental health issues. Now, I did file a grievance about that and had that language removed from the memos. But this memo, which unlawfully, in violation of EEO, referred to my mental health condition, was the work of my immediate supervisor, Kathleen Perry, and Kathleen Nixon. These two women, collectively, they both have been at the board for about 25 years, had 50 years of labor law experience. And they didn't know enough not to put that in that memo. What they knew was that they could get away with it. Mm-hmm. I took sort of a softball approach to it. All I asked was that the language been removed. I could have gone for something stronger, but my main concern was just the language.
What should the unions do about it? Because it's happening to other workers who are being tormented, who are being bullied. There's an epidemic of workplace bullying in the United States.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's not an isolated incident. It's common in a lot of jobs.
Well, I came by the National Education Association, and there was a big banner out that this is Anti-Bullying Month. Mm-hmm. What should the union? I think they should develop a united front about it. I literally think they should take to the street.
There need to be demonstrations, a political campaign.
Yes, and I think there also needs to be lawsuits. I think there needs to be. Well, could I have sued the NLRB for tortious conduct? Now, I'm not sure if I could or not, but even if I could have, the perpetuators of that conduct, the two Kathleens, who, by the way, were given a free hand by the chairman, Pierce, would suffer no penalty whatsoever as federal employees. I could not get through to them. It wouldn't have cost them a penny. I don't know.
But if the unions, who are supposed to represent the workers themselves, are going along with it, that puts the workers in an impossible situation.
No. Oh, I can't. I can't. Oh, I talked to every possible person I could at the board. I talked to the inspector general. I talked to the union. I talked to management. I talked to my friends. I talked to every person I could literally think of, and there was no recourse anywhere. Not even from my friends. They basically just said, "Suck it up."
So it's a system thing.
Yes.
This is the system.
Yes, but I think it's not just the NLRB. I actually, one of my friends who I think is correct, the the one with the disability who is currently being in the process of being forced out after 20-some years of dedicated service. Her response is that we've become a bully society, which I think is correct. But that still doesn't take away from the issue of what the unions need to do. The unions need to present a united front. We need to take it to the street. We're not putting up with it anymore. If you bully, we are going to publicize your bullying. I'm not saying this should be done or there's enough evidence to back it up, but how would it look if the union was picketing outside the NLRB with signs saying, Chairman Pierce, stop the bullying? And as far as what I do know about his responsibility is that, and he's been on the board probably 7 or 8 years now, although he wasn't chairman that whole time. When he first came in, a well-respected supervisor went in and talked to him and said to him flat out, the manager of your staff, the one that does the actual hand-to-hand management, so to speak, Kathleen Nixon, mistreats her employees. And as far as what I do know about his responsibility is that, and he's been on the board probably 7 or 8 years now, although he wasn't chairman that whole time. When he first came in, a well-respected supervisor went in and talked to him and said to him flat out, the manager of your staff, the one that does the actual hand-to-hand management, so to speak, Kathleen Nixon, mistreats her employees. His response was, I don't care. She gets the cases out. The chairman of the National Labor Relations Board. Personally, if I was picketing the NLRB, my sign would read, impeach Chairman Pierce.